Team Fortress. This name would go on to touch the hearts of many gamers familiar with Valve's large lineup of popular titles through their extremely popular free-to-play title, Team Fortress 2. But not nearly as popular was the first game in the franchise, or its history. While Team Fortress 2 did indeed gain quite the critical acclaim on release in 2007, and is now one of the main titles to showcase Valve's success, Team Fortress Classic didn't fare too poorly either, and just as importantly, allowed Team Fortress 2 to be possible. As arena shooters grew in the late 90s, so too did online gaming, with games like Doom and Quake becoming godfathers of the genre, and further raising the bar for both shooters and online gaming alike. Team Fortress wasn't perfect or highly balanced like one would want in a fast-paced shooter, but what it did have was innovation and a dedicated team of programmers that would go on to influence the critically renowned company known as Valve. Even so, Team Fortress Classic would, over time, inevitably become just a shadow of its future installment. And yet, in one way or another, Team Fortress lives on, be it the old mods, new games, or games made by the same programmers who created Team Fortress. The heart of Team Fortress continues to push the gaming industry through Valve. While it may not be considered their best work by many a gamer, Team Fortress Classic earns at least a glance, as it is the inspiration for many acclaimed future works and was still a good game in its own right for the time. Released 20 years ago, and being the source of many of Valve's future successes, Team Fortress's impact would affect the gaming industry many years thereafter. This is Team Fortress Classic. Team Fortress was primarily written and designed by three talented programmers who would become quite prominent figures: Robin Walker, John Cook, and Ian Coughley. Robin and John grew up together in the 80s and enjoyed playing a variety of games, including board games to role-playing games to, of course, computer games. Robin's father was a programmer for IBM. Robin learned of computer science through him, and they started programming together. John's story was a little different. He decided at the age of 13 that he wanted to make video games after learning to program from his schooling. While the plans were slightly different between these two, the intent was all the same: to learn to program and eventually make their own games. Robin and John graduated from the same high school and enrolled at the same university, both with the same intentions still. While attending university, however, their paths initially broke off a little when Robin became disinterested in university and dropped out to get a job working as a full-time programmer at an ICT transformation company called NEC. At some point, John too dropped out to work on Team Fortress. He initially planned to do this for only about a year, but he never came back to the university. Ian Coughley, third co-creator of Team Fortress, met Robin through his brother from said university and met John through Robin. During the day, Ian came to LAN parties often and ran gaming competitions at a local internet cafe with Robin when Robin's brother left to Singapore. During the night, however, the two would often play Quake Deathmatch online on one of the few servers. Only about 7 or 8 in all of Australia, according to Robin. When they became bored with Deathmatch after a while, they instead started modding with a modding platform known as Quake C, literally beginning development of Team Fortress the day that Quake C released. The group would often have LAN parties with another group who lived nearby and played Doom. One of the maps that stood out to them was a team versus team mod, 2 versus 2 to be specific. This map was called Fortress, and would go on to inspire the team to create their own version of the map in Quake C that originally didn't have teams, but was instead pure deathmatch. The team used the weapons and their differences as a basis for their class system. While Quake only had a single class, Team Fortress was originally developed with 5 distinct classes that had their own strengths and weaknesses. A system that Robin noted as being inspired by Dungeons & Dragons for the classes, and Ian mentioned Syndicate as an influence for the strengths and weaknesses of the classes. The overall intent was to make a team versus team game, but development for this wasn't easy. While the game mode Capture the Flag is simple in concept, Quake C made executing such a game mode quite tricky. This was especially difficult since there wasn't a single set of rules at the time that was uniformly agreed upon. No one really had a good way to teach anyone things inside of Quake. You could just put text on the screen. One of the positives of Team Fortress's map system was that level designers had a lot of power to control exactly how the game played out on their map. One of the negatives was that level designers had lots of power. What that meant was that you might play two maps that both call themselves CTF maps in Team Fortress, but they might have subtly different rules. Team Fortress, the Quake mod, not Team Fortress Classic, would release on August 24th, 1996, and feedback from players would come in fast. The team attempted to keep up with demand. Early on, we were all contributing everything. Lots of coding, tweaking the 3D player models, new textures, map design. None of us had great artistic skills, so after the mod had a little initial success, we started getting more art contributions from the other people in the community. This made the game look much more awesome. Overall, signs were great, and some companies, including the likes of Activision, even went so far as to contact the team to state how much they liked the game. One of these companies was Valve, who, by John Cook's accounts, liked the idea of flying the team out to work with them. The reason given from Valve was that it was an opportunity for the modding team to educate on what makes it a good modding platform and what mod makers look for in a game engine that makes it extensively moddable. I think the main difference between them and everyone else who had talked to us, we'd by then sort of gotten used to publishers mailing us to say, hey, we're interested in doing X and Y, and those turning into long email threads that never went anywhere. The difference was that within a few days, maybe overnight, us saying, yeah, we're interested, and Valve replying back to say, okay, here are your plane tickets, let's do this. Keeping in mind, of course, that we're still talking about Team Fortress, the mod for Quake, and not Team Fortress Classic yet, Ian, John, and Robin proposed to make a Team Fortress 2 for Quake 2 instead of porting over Team Fortress like they had been doing when first working there. After a few months of working with Valve, Gabe called the team into his office to ask if they wanted to make their positions permanent, buying the rights to Team Fortress in the process, and the talented programmers were now working at Valve. The next stop would be Half-Life, where the small group alongside other employees at Valve helped build their SDK and helped develop Half-Life's multiplayer. Team Fortress Classic would release worldwide on April 7th, 1999 as a free add-on for Half-Life and arguably helped revolutionize the first-person shooter genre, a trend that Valve would develop as time went on. Team Fortress Classic would receive overall positive reception upon release. Players were delighted by how heavily the game would rely on sophisticated team-based tactics with a large amount of playable classes it offered. Classes, maps, and other distinct parts of its multiplayer experience became hugely recognizable almost instantly in the to-be Team Fortress franchise. Not everything was well received though, with some reviewers disliking the game's graphics and its communication system, which was described as being too clunky for a team-based shooter. Even so, after many versions of the game with the help of many programmers, Valve had created an impressive first-person shooter in its own right, that also helped innovate in such a way that future developers surely took note of. And it was free for those who bought Half-Life, which also helps justify the multiplayer-only nature of the game for its time. Unlike other popular arena shooters of the time, Team Fortress Classic is an online team versus team-based first-person shooter, where you and your team work together to achieve a specific goal, whether it be capture the flag or escorting a VIP player. Capture the Flag is a pretty traditional game overall, and in Team Fortress Classic, you, as a player, attempt to travel to the enemy's base in order to acquire their flag, bring it back to your base, and score by capturing said flag. And the game mode Hunted features a unique Civilian Class, where a single lightly armed player needs to be escorted to safety by a team of bodyguards while the opposing team, being composed of snipers, must attempt to kill the civilian before he's escorted to safety. While Hunted and Territorial Control would be played a decent amount for a time, Capture the Flag is the game mode that would become the most popular over a consistent period of time, likely due to its simplicity, which allowed it to be played more easily, without the need for a complicated or coordinated strategy to win. Players have the choice to play as one of 9 classes to help them win their matches: Scout, Soldier, Pyro, Demoman, Heavy Weapons, Engineer, Medic, Sniper, and Spy, all of which with their own loadout of weaponry, special ability, and set of stats that would complement their role. With a variety of classes, maps, and game modes for the player to play with, the rules are set, and anyone who plays Team Fortress Classic can enjoy the game knowing the rest is up to their creativity and how they use said classes and maps to their advantage, while simultaneously attempting to show off or practice their own first-person shooting skills against other players. Where other first-person shooters would typically rely heavily on its single-player and use a free-for-all game mode as their primary multiplayer offering, Team Fortress Classic contrasts this by not only offering team-based multiplayer as their primary game mode setting, but also by including no single-player modes at all, not very typical for 1999. Combine this with the fact that there's no local multiplayer at all and is online only, you might be able to understand how risky this game would be if it weren't bundled with the critically renowned Half-Life. With that said, there were plenty of features Team Fortress Classic had that were so revolutionary, even if it wasn't fully realized at the time, that only recently have we started to see games with a similar formula for handling classes and team-based game modes in a competitive first-person shooter where each type of character has a counter. For all it did in order to have effective counters to each class that attempt to balance the game, many found that in practice, balance still felt off due to some classes being very powerful, and simultaneously being able to take a lot of damage, while others were weak, and while they did have their own strengths, they still feel very underpowered in comparison for many players. Team Fortress Classic remained an unforgivingly difficult game for newcomers, partially because of the difficulty curves for said classes. But for those willing to try out more classes and put more time into the game, it provided the strongest team-based gameplay that Valve had to offer. In most first-person shooters of the time, namely GoldenEye, Doom, Quake, Wolfenstein 3D, and even Half-Life, class systems were hardly ever, if ever, implemented without the use of mods. Whether it be due to developers not thinking about it since classes were primarily an element in games with RPG elements, or it be due to first-person shooters having a working formula at the time that mostly consisted of free-for-all game modes anyway, classes just weren't on the table for the most part. For Team Fortress Classic, however, this was arguably the core of its gameplay, and with quite the variety. To start off with one of the more interesting classes, the Scout is a high mobility, low health and armor class. In other games where movement is key while defenses are low, this is often made up for by the class having a glass cannon-like quality to it, being that it's very powerful in attacking, with quick and heavy damage bursts due to its fast-paced nature. The Scout does barely any damage, however, and is almost solely picked up for being a flag carrier. The good news is that the Scout is the fastest class in the game, even without much damage, defenses, or utility to back up its name. Snipers, on the other hand, aren't very fast or have much in the way of armor or health, but it's more than what the Scout offers and has more defensive utility due to his sniper. While other games in recent years have mobility as a key factor for even snipers, Team Fortress Classic puts the sniper in a position where it does what you would normally expect a sniper to do: hang back and snipe players from far away. Able to be shredded easily up close and being effective at a distance, don't expect to quickscope with this class and get away with it. The next class to observe is the Soldier, wielding a powerful rocket launcher as a primary weapon, being capable of playing offense and defense effectively if used well, and medium overall stats outside of speed, which is low. The Soldier may be the most balanced class in the game. While the rocket launcher may sound overpowered due to its high damage, it actually tends to be quite balanced overall due to classes that have a great amount of health, and these classes are often the opponents a soldier should expect to face anyway. The other weapons are also serviceable as well, although not ones you'll likely be using unless you're going against the less powerful enemies who have high mobility, since they can dodge rockets far more easily. Outside of rockets, however, there are other explosives in the game, many of which are carried by the Demo Man. Explosive in nature and well suited for both offense and defense under certain situations, the Demo Man carries up to 4 of the most explosive grenades in the game, the MIRV grenades. Alongside these are 2 grenade launchers that can also hold their own, and his Det Pack, which can be used to assist teammates with better flag routes. While more utility-based than the previously mentioned classes, the Demo Man can certainly be used to great effect if the enemy team isn't careful. Quite possibly the most interesting of classes in Team Fortress Classic, the Medic is unique in its capability to do both. Heal teammates as well as poison enemies if they get too close. The Medic has overall medium stats, although can be killed very quickly by other classes, making poisoning enemies not quite as viable an option as many players might like. However, being the only class in the game that can heal teammates, cure injuries and infections caused by medics on the enemy team, it's no surprise that the Medic can be quite useful even outside of engaging with the enemy. Unlike the other classes mentioned so far, the Heavy Weapons guy is unique in that he's slow and not very mobile. Being the slowest moving class, in fact, much armor is needed to make this class viable, and viable he is. With an abundance of armor and a deadly assault cannon that can shred just about any enemy with very little concentrated fire, this Heavy is quite possibly the most viable defensive option in the game. Weaker classes can have a chance at killing the Heavy Weapons guy if he's caught off guard due to the slow spin-up time of the assault cannon, but more likely you'll be wanting to avoid the Heavy Weapons guy altogether. With mobility being quite high when using classes that are likely to infiltrate the other team's base, one class can be a good counter to said infiltration due to its close quarters capabilities, without the need to be ultra precise. This class is the Pyro, has medium overall stats, and like the Soldier, is similarly well-rounded in offensive and defensive capabilities. One issue that arises with his stats and weapons, however, is the lack of particularly powerful weaponry, being a sort of jack of all trades, but a master of none. Still, the Pyro is the only class in the game that can generate so many fire effects, and can be quite effective if catching enemies off guard, causing chaos and panic in the process. If the Medic is the most interesting class due to its form of viability in healing, the Spy is likely the most unique class overall due to its different abilities that no other class can even hope to relate to. The Spy is capable of changing team colors and appear as any class. Alongside this is an ability to feign death to make it appear as if someone killed the player. While disguised as the enemy, the Spy can be quite effective at taking out sentries since they don't target him, or backstab unaware enemies using his powerful knife. Between his capabilities of being in the enemy's base without suspicion and medium mobility, the Spy can be a good flag carrier to go along with his other utility. To round the classes off, the final one to mention is the Engineer. While the Engineer doesn't offer the most powerful weaponry for his equipable weapons, as many other classes, or is particularly good at any particular offensive front, the Engineer provides quite possibly the best defensive utility to the team, with being able to place sentry guns at the base that can destroy enemies extremely quickly. With a shotgun and EMP grenade as his other weapons, the Engineer can put up quite the respectable defense for those who may wish to grab said team's flag. While in practice, some of these classes end up feeling useless or near useless for many players due to being only good at one or extremely few things, Team Fortress Classic undoubtedly offers far more options than what was out there for first-person shooters. Even with the arguably poor balance this title would have, there's still no chance for a well-balanced team to have all players with the same or only 2 classes. There's still enough situational utility to want classes that aren't the most played. Either way, when compared to their competitors, Team Fortress Classic offers the most unique and innovative gameplay system for its team-based combat of the era. While Team Fortress Classic offers quite the varied set of classes to work with, it doesn't matter much if its core gameplay was poor. The core of its gameplay, however, was so good that even bugs like rocket jumping were implemented as an intentional feature in future installments of the game. Even outside of things that would make a return in Team Fortress 2, some mechanics would be popular enough that some fans to this day prefer Team Fortress Classic's gameplay over Team Fortress 2's. Typically stating that while it's easy to get into and play Team Fortress Classic, it's difficult but takes skill to intentionally pull off its more intricate mechanics. One example of this would be bunny hopping, an exploit that was eventually found to allow the player to exploit the friction-based system for a greater amount of movement speed. While what you're seeing right now was patched, the game does still have bunny hopping, although now it's capped to 170% movement speed, and if the player reaches the 170% cap, they'll be instantly reduced to about 50% movement speed. With needing to be precise in jumping, strafing, and attempting to stay under the limit, bunny hopping became a very difficult and yet still very beneficial tool for very skilled gamers to pull off. While it may not initially look like it, there are many skills like this that can be learned to truly optimize the effectiveness a player has in their gameplay, which includes techniques known as ramp sliding, sharking, pipe bomb jumping, grenade jumping, handheld grenade jumping, dispenser jumping, sniper jumping, and napalm jumping. With enough time and practice, many gamers would come to enjoy the many techniques, intentional or otherwise, Team Fortress Classic would have to offer, and this would become core to the competitive scene this game would boast over time. In the years following Team Fortress Classic's release, Valve has significantly supported the game and its future installments through updates. There were some setbacks, however, most notably the original Team Fortress 2 announcement alongside gameplay and clear intentions to make the franchise more, not less realistic. Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood would be shown to the public at E3 of 1999 and was advertised to release in 2000, primarily boasting features that would change the team-based gameplay with an easier communications system, more advanced technology for more realistic characters, animation, and movement, as well as allowing the player to play with advanced AI. On June of 2000, Team Fortress 2 would be delayed and wouldn't appear in the same format since. Meanwhile, in the same month, Team Fortress Classic was officially updated and renamed to Team Fortress 1.5, bringing with it all sorts of new features including new sounds and weapons, enhanced graphics, and new models for classes and weapons, new maps from popular map makers, and more. This would also be the first standalone version of Team Fortress. Team Fortress Classic, or 1.5 as its alternative name, would be updated heavily from 2003 all the way to 2017. Team Fortress 2 instead would be greatly overhauled and was announced in 2006, with a trailer to showcase its classes in a clearly different art style than what was previously shown. While some purists of the original Team Fortress variants may have been disappointed in these drastic changes, the game may have been better off with them, being significantly better received with widespread critical acclaim, winning many awards, and surely having a larger fan base, partly in thanks to its free-to-play nature. While Valve's success was largely attributed by games that are now very different from the original Team Fortress Classic, the aforementioned programmers that made Team Fortress possible in the first place would stay to work at Valve for a long time. Team Fortress, as a franchise, had quite the ups and downs throughout its existence. Valve tried time and time again to change the game to suit its fanbase. It was published in very odd and inconsistent ways, going from a mod to an add-on title to a standalone paid title to a free-to-play game, and the fans likely only truly enjoyed one of the many versions to satisfy their first-person shooter urge. But while Team Fortress Classic would ultimately become just a name for many fans today, its essence still survives in the first-person shooters that we have today.